Good morning, everyone. It's Monday morning, and we're back in our habitual habitat. Those of you who've been watching consistently in real time notice that we changed our backdrop because we changed our scene. But now we're back at Chela Bhavan in the Ananda Palo Alto community. It's Monday, and Monday is the day that I get to invite you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, which will create positive benefits for the work that we're doing. The more subscribers, I don't know exactly what happens, but I'm told good things happen. Besides which, then you will always know when I have made a new recording, which I'm going to assume is a benefit to you. And it's free. I also want you to know that the mission of the Masters, which is what I call the work that I do, is supported by people who feel it's of benefit to the world to have it happen. So you can go to Patreon, which is this wonderful website for connecting creative people with those who would like to support them. You can go to my website, Asha Joy, and on the website you can make one-time donations or intermittent ones. Patreon is a subscription donation service. You can sign up. Anything that you care to contribute is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. So now let's pray, and then we'll start our program. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly I bow to you all. Help us to feel your living presence within us. Make your guidance so clear in our hearts, minds, and spirits that our actions spontaneously and effortlessly match our highest interest. Your guidance to us is simply that, to help us to find the way to happiness. Show us that pathway shining bright and attractive, that we may follow it eagerly and joyously until we merge with Thee. Om. Peace. Amen. The section that we're working with now in our Ananda Way of Life, Guidelines of Conduct for Ananda Members of the Sevaka Order, is Article 6, and the title of Article 6 is Marriage. It is not, however, what you might expect it to be, which is rules about marriage or how to get along with people or anything like that. It's really about making the decision to get married. And it's a complicated issue because there's probably very few areas of life in which compelling karmic energy just moves us. And then you add to that, especially if the couple is younger, you have the compelling energy of sexual attraction, which is an essential part of life, and it's not something that we can pretend is not there, or that we should pretend is not there. It's a very grounding and foundational part for almost everyone of their relationships, especially when you're younger, especially at the beginning. But because of that, especially the way we operate nowadays, where sexual experience is a common part of life outside of marriage, and a sexual relationship can start before a committed marriage relationship starts, and none of that is written in this article. I want you to say I'm just talking about circumstances. And our community has never been one to dictate people's personal lives. There are so many confusing factors that seem definitive and absolutely clear, and yet are actually far more ephemeral than people realize. So you have this ever ongoing reality of the intensity of the moment versus the long-range view. Over many years of counseling, not received, but offered. I've come to a simple aphorism which I think is true, which is it's really not hard to love people. I mean, people are fundamentally lovable, and most people have charming characteristics that we can just totally enjoy, and we can enter into that, whatever that is, and go there and just love people. If you open your heart at all, it's easy to love. To make a satisfying life together, that is very challenging. And so what happens is those with more life experience, whether that life experience is in previous lifetimes or in this one, and manifests simply as chronological age or spiritual wisdom, whatever it might be, those who understand what it takes to make a fulfilling life together recognize that recognize the potential pitfalls and the impossibilities sometimes when people really do love each other. But the practical potential or the actual union of life purpose or union of more subtle qualities that make the difference between just a happy friendship and actually beginning to weave your karma together in such a way that it brings you happiness instead of misery. So the marriage section, which I'm going to start reading now, is mostly about within community, how does this all work out? We have multiple communities now. At the time that this was first written, there was fundamentally only one community. But even with multiple communities and even international communities, the gene pool is still pretty small. And if you're inclined to want to make your life with Ananda, it's not like you have just a free range. It's not like you have the whole world to choose from. If these values are the values you want to live by, and yes, it's quite possible to put your life together with someone who's not necessarily on this path or not necessarily following the Ananda way, because what makes a life work together is very subtle. I remember asking my father. My father was active, and we lived in Texas for the first 20 years of their marriage, the first 15 years of my life. And my father was active in helping to desegregate in El Paso, Texas, which, as he himself said, was much more west than south. And therefore, he was unpopular for what he was doing, but he wasn't putting himself or his family in danger. I don't think he would have put us in danger. I don't think he would have lived in a place where he would have been put in danger because we were Jewish and his sense of justice was too strong. But he worked for desegregation in, I'm talking in the 50s. So it was early in that cycle. So I asked him once, I said, what if I wanted to marry someone who was a different race? And I remembered his answer because it was a good answer, and I don't think he was covering prejudice, because he never manifested it. He said quite simply, he says, marriage is difficult enough. He said, the more you have in common, the easier it will be for you. And if you come from different races, he said, that's just one more thing where you don't come from the same understanding. And it never showed, as I said, any prejudice, but that helped me, just even at a very young age, it helped me appreciate, oh yeah, there's a lot of factors here. And in very traditional societies, Kali Yuga times, really, but still in many cultures today, young people don't make their own marriage choice, because if you want to just put it in simple terms, what do they know? We know how we feel, and that doesn't mean that young people are incapable of knowing what their destiny is, even knowing appropriately and positively what their destiny is, because age is just an illusion. We are as old as our spiritual the true mark of age is our spiritual understanding. And many people who are young have much deeper, young in their bodies, or just have been on the spiritual path for longer than a lot of people who are old in their bodies. So merely having been in your body longer than someone else does not make you wiser. Some children are wiser than their parents because it's just their stage of spiritual evolution. It's what they are and who they are. However, over time in traditional societies, the decision for marriage is not left in the hands of young people who are caught up in all sorts of romantic ideals and do not know yet what is required to make a successful union. Now, many parents are not at all wise. They're either selfish and they're using their children for their own gratification on many levels, or they're just simply not wise. They don't know what real values are, and they may not respect their children enough to make intelligent decisions. I have a lot of friends in India, and arranged marriage is still quite common there. So I've had some first-hand conversations on this subject, and so I don't worship chronological age, and I don't respect parents just because they're parents if the decisions and the plans they're making are not wise. However, it's a good idea to listen to people who are not caught up in the same compelling urgencies of the moment. It's just a good idea. So we have, to a certain extent, in our residential communities. Now, I want to just put one more thing here. It's very helpful in your life to cultivate friendships with people whose wisdom you trust, if you are fortunate enough to have access to such people. People who are not compelled by their own self-interest, who are not blinded by their own attachments and desires. I mean, when I was a teenager and a younger person, I just had no concept of what it meant to be a parent. And I was inconsiderate of my own parents and other people's parents on certain occasions. I wasn't a bad child, but I just didn't understand until, I became old enough to have friends who were raising children, and I profoundly appreciated the level of sacrifice that's involved. And I developed a greater appreciation about why you should honor your mother and your father, because they give up their lives, mostly, many, to facilitate ours. I remembered the first time it occurred to me when my father was not a bold person. He liked to plan. He liked to have things. He liked to move within safe parameters, and his concept of safe parameters was considerably narrower than mine. And both my parents lacked a certain wild spontaneity, which of course I began to value because that's what teenagers value. But I finally realized, truthfully, I think my parents were somewhat timid by temperament, and I don't think they ever had a wild youth. But I also realized that their complete stick in the mud, we better plan it, we have to make sure that nothing goes wrongness, was entirely because of the three children, myself, my brother, and my sister. It's out because they had to focus their lives on making sure that we were well taken care of and safe. And, any possibility of wild spontaneity had to be balanced against that which they lovingly assumed, that need to take care of us. So I realized how unfair it was to accuse my parents of lacking the wildness of youth when I personally was responsible for taking it away from them. But I was much older before I understood that. But you see how the conflicts come together. If a young person intends to have a family and they have no idea of what that means, and sometimes the youth is correct, and old age has just lost its joie de vivre. But sometimes age is also wise. So in many traditional cultures, Parents make the choice. And as Master said, he said it seemed to him that happiness in marriage was as present in arranged marriage as it was in self-selected marriage, because he came to live in the West, of course. He didn't see either system as being flawless, but he thought that both had a good chance of success. So at Ananda, we've tried to find something somewhere in the middle. And I have to say, at least from my experience of being the responsible for a community here in Palo Alto, I'm emeritus at this point, but for many years I held the responsibility. It's a very tricky thing to implement, and I myself have always never really tried to enforce this unless it was requested of me. Even then I tread very lightly. But here it is, and here we go. Just by the way, I went back to look at this. The only instruction for actually how to relate was in the section called Home Life. Interaction with others within the home should be based not on egoic familiarity, but on mutual respect, supportiveness, and love. Life's longer rhythms should be emphasized in every familial and friendly relationship, and the frictions of the moment, if any, seen always in a more enduring context. That's about as specific as these articles get. So, Article 6, marriage. Members should ponder the fact that marriage is not only a private and personal affair, but also a social state. In a spiritually close community, especially like Ananda, a disharmonious marriage cannot but affect in some way the harmony of everyone, whereas a harmonious marriage gives joy to all. So this is essentially the justification for the community having a position. In a close spiritual community like this one, which you can translate into a close family or any setting that's continuous, I mean, just to give you some of the unique features, especially when this was written, when Ananda was one physical location, it meant that because we tended to all know each other on a continuum that didn't stop. So the whole community could be friends with both half of a marriage. And both of them could be your independent friends before they ever became a marriage. So then if that marriage becomes disharmonious, then all of a sudden this one is mad at the other one, and whose side are you on, and who's doing what to whom, and then all the relationships become strained because both of you are equally my friends, but you're furious at this one, and so how dare you side with this one? I thought you were my friend, but yes, this was also my friend. And I mean, that's just the beginning of it. And then if it turns into a divorce, which alas happens within Ananda also, then all of a sudden you may have two camps. Now it depends how maturely the two halves of the marriage behave with each other, but it gets to be quite complex. And then of course just simply we all see each other really often, and when people are in disharmony with each other and their paths still have to cross or their lives still have to carry on, what to speak of children and the friends of the children, it just ripples out and makes everybody's life really difficult. Now, we don't own each other. I mean, mutual respect, supportiveness, not over familiarity. It's not like you owe it to me. See, that's the Kali Yuga way. The Kali Yuga way was you married and you had to stay married. And no matter how hellish and miserable your marriage was, you had to stay in it because you didn't dare. Well, you would be condemned by God, condemned by your society, whatever it might be, so you just held it together. As Swami said, lifelong marriage is not always a spiritual victory. Merely to stick it out does not necessarily mean that you've been victorious in any way. So we're not Kali Yuga in that sense. It's not like you have to do it. No, not at all. I've been, and this, I'm going to, as it happens, this is in the context of India sometimes, but I've been appalled sometimes by the family's insistence that the couple stay together because otherwise it would, quote, and I'll use the exact phrase, embarrass the family. It's just like, unthinkable to me. I mean, in one case, the parent came to visit and the parent found the spouse so horrible, the parent refused to stay in the house and went and lived in a hotel, but insisted that their child stay in the marriage. That's not love. That's just pure selfishness, and I have no respect for it. And that is not what I'm talking about. But what I'm saying is, we are in a community. And if I go all the way back, now this is moving a little bit away from Ananda as a way of life. This is really life in a community. Let's see. Life in a community cannot reasonably entail a strong affirmation of personal freedom and independence. In any personal decision, the welfare of all should be taken into account. And I mean, that's just a fact. If you live, I mean, you're more than welcome to live independently. There's a friend of mine who spent a few years at Ananda, and absolutely, I mean, the only word I can think of, he loathed community. It was just, he couldn't bear the idea that other people would actually like be in his business and have influence over his decisions. Just absolutely not. Very spiritual person. He's lived a very spiritual life, completely dedicated to God, but very solitary, because it just wasn't his karma. It didn't work for him. So one can rebel against this. It's perfectly fine to rebel against it, but it's the fact. If we live close together, and especially when this was written, nowadays, because there are multiple communities, if things get tough between people, you can go somewhere else, which has been actually very helpful. I mean, things get tough not just within marriage. Things get tough because of personal things, or the job doesn't work out, or there is no job that suits you, or you feel sad for one reason or another. And it's nice having lots of places. We can go to other countries and still stay within Ananda community. Now I've tried to make this broad, but now we're quite narrow. But some of the principles here still hold. So still he's saying, and then of course, you know, when people are happy together, happiness spreads. When you're running a happy home and you're raising happy children, because fundamentally there's a powerful union there. Now, I also put a lot of regard. I think sexual attraction is enormously helpful in holding a marriage together, and it's very concerning if the sexual attraction is not within the marriage. I mean, that is a very unsettling energy to have within the community. So it's better that the couple be strongly attracted to each other than that that attraction be milder and they can commend themselves on being spiritual, but it's because the attraction is going outside of the marriage that is not a victory. And a strong sexual union, a harmonious sexual relationship, and really, really liking each other. I mean, that's really, really liking each other is a real good idea in marriage. Now, either it comes spontaneously or it grows slowly. You know, you learn to appreciate over a long period of time, if the emphasis is on life's longer rhythm, so you see how everything weaves together, the qualities that you think are the most important are not necessarily the ones that are the most important. This is not about disharmony or not liking each other, but I've always been amused. The worldwide spiritual directors of Ananda are a married couple. They've been married since the early 70s. and Jyotish and Devi. And Jyotish is a part of his characteristic is he's very impersonal. He's very loving, but he's impersonal. And his wife Devi said, from the beginning I respected Jyotish for being so impersonal, but it took me many years to enjoy it before I could really genuinely enjoy it. But I thought that was a very good summation. You can respect something in somebody, or you might even not respect it. You might just tolerate it. But over time, the qualities that make for a fulfilling life and an enduringly harmonious one are not necessarily the fiery qualities that you think are important at the start. However, a certain amount of simpatico, of just vibing on the same level, is very, very helpful. So then it says, and these are the guidelines, no two members wishing to get married should feel that the matter is their concern alone. This is where accepting the conditions of community life are there. And I would translate this the way most people think about it as family. You know, it's just, if we're going to get married, it's a union of more than just two of us. And, you know, see, this is one of the reasons why marriage is having so much trouble in our present time, is, and this expands this conversation to more than just our residential communities. Nowadays, people think the question of getting married just concerns the two of us. And okay, I actually am a very independent person. I like to make my own decisions. I've accepted community wholeheartedly. When I was in community right at the very beginning, like maybe the first month, oddly, this is a visual memory of mine. I was standing in this particular hallway where there was a bulletin board with some announcements on it. I was looking at these announcements, and it was while I was standing there that occurred to me that people who meditate are very intuitive, and we have a very strong sense of each other. We don't need a lot of evidence. And I myself have a very intuitive sense of people's reality, not infallible by any means, but it was strong. So I was standing there and I realized, as much as I read other people, they're going to read me. And I just have no place to hide here. And I remember standing there saying to myself, either I accept this completely or I'm never going to be able to live happily here. Of course, I've spent 50 years in community, so I guess I worked it out. But when two people are becoming attracted to each other and thinking about making a lasting alliance, in our culture nowadays, people say, well, it's just up to me. I don't have to ask anybody. Okay, I can go a certain distance with that. But then what happens is there's no context. And we try to be all in all to one another. And couples think they must be. Swami, in his blunt way, said, no two people could be all in all to each other unless they're exceptionally stupid. Meaning, if their consciousness is so limited that all they need is what one other person can give them. In a traditional society, and there's no going back, friends, we're not going there, but there's a lot of wisdom in a traditional society. Marriage fit into a larger context. And so your husband, your wife, was extremely important because there's a unique quality to it. It's extremely important, but you still are a daughter and a friend and a niece and a sister. And in a traditional world where all those people stay with you and you stay with them, then your spouse doesn't have to be everything to you. Your spouse can provide what spouses can provide each other, which is a great deal and is unique, but you still are nurtured from lots of different angles. You're nurtured, you're entertained, you have an opportunity to serve, you're guided, you're blessed, you're challenged. But it's in a whole context. In India, where the mother-in-law can make your life hell or heaven for the wife, I remember, and it was so hard for us to understand as Americans at the time. She said, "My husband, he's okay. My mother-in-law, she's a pippin," is how she put it. And only many years later did I really understand what she meant by that and why it actually mattered. Husband was in context. And that context gave strength to the whole reality. In the world, the Western world especially, where you put everything on your spouse, and inevitably your spouse can't fulfill it. Even if your spouse is a pippin, they can't do it because it's an unrealistic expectation. We suffer. And Ananda is, at least at the origin point here, at this point was an American Western movement. And so we were having to work with a whole lot of preconceptions. And I've gone over my time here. I'm just going to spend another minute. Let's see, where is this one? Ananda members should sift mentally through their personal habits and not continue unthinkingly in old patterns of behavior merely because of some prior momentum that has been established in their lives. So the article about marriage is, let's not continue unthinkingly just because there's prior momentum. Let's actually ask the question, what's really going to bring us the fulfillment we desire? God bless you.